Good afternoon, Michael Malice here. Let that be your welcome for the next hour. Guys, we have a really special guest today, Robby Starbuck, and Robbie's documentary is called The War on Children. And Robbie, I wanted to talk to you for a very specific reason. I was recently talking to my good buddy, Patrick Friedman. He's a friend I made here in Austin, grandson of Milton and Rose Friedman, the economist, son of David Friedman, the economist. And he said, I'm sick of arguing with people about theory. Like, we're at a point where we can actually get wins and results, and I want to worry about that. And I saw on your Twitter that you were racking up win after win after win. And I'm like, okay, let me get Robbie here to talk about what he's been doing recently, because I think conservatives, broadly speaking, don't know how to take a win. They're so used to having the table run on them that when something positive happens, they just don't register it at all. I'll give you a very obvious example. You and I and everyone listening to this, remember, refugees welcome, refugees welcome. The signs were everywhere. And then very quickly, those signs went away and it became Black Lives Matter. And everyone stopped talking about having Middle East refugees, flooding America. But before we get into your documentary and what you've been doing with these corporations, you're Cuban. I was born in the Soviet Union. If there's one group of people, if I had to choose immigrants, it would be Cubans, because you guys really understand the nature of authoritarian evil, and you see things that Americans, I think, who are often a little naive, will completely miss. One of the little great miracles in my life was being able to tell a Cuban friend of mine that Castro had died. So that had really made my day. So I'd love to hear, before we get into your current day work, your family story and how that informs your political views.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, Cubans are the most base political population in the United States. There's not a more conservative voting bloc, and it's because our families went through hell with communism. And to be honest, I think we have probably what I would call, one of the most similar tracks to what America's going through. Cuba had kind of gone through this weird period where historically there was just a lot of people unhappy with the state of the country, right?
Yeah.
And before 2016, I think that's kind of where a lot of people were at, was just there were a lot of weird things that had happened in our country over the decade that was, before that. And I think in general, people were ready for a shakeup, right? So we got Trump. I mean, I endorsed Trump in 2015 during the primary for that reason, is I felt like America needed a disruption, and he was the great disruptor, right? But as we go further out from that, what happens is the left wing track gets much more extreme, so they've been radicalized to a degree where they've essentially had these training centers. We call them colleges, but they're essentially training centers to churn out Marxist activists. And they come out of there not as trained professionals, which used to be sort of the idea behind college, right? Is you'd have these, overly educated professionals, and they were mostly harmless, was the idea, at least in theory. And they go out into the world and they do their job, right? And so for a long time, that kind of worked, right? But now we're at a very different place where they come out and they're not professionally trained at anything except for activism. They see themselves as a node to spread their ideology. So whatever company they go into, they're there to explicitly spread an ideology. And that's where we get into a lot of the DEI and wokeness stuff that we've gotten into recently. But in terms of the broader picture, I see very clearly communism happens very fast, and a lot of
Yes.
people don't realize it. Like Castro never actually explicitly came out and said he was a communist until he consolidated power. A lot of people don't realize that. He was asked about it, and people would accuse him of being a communist or a Marxist, and he would always respond with something to the effect of he was a humanist, or he would start talking about social justice or free healthcare and racial justice. I mean, all things we see now as buzzwords in the Democratic Party. So the party at large has become this machine on the left in America that resembles very similarly what the Cuban, sort of communist party had been under Castro in the initial stages. And so I think that's why a lot of Cubans recognize the dangers of what we're facing in a very short time period, because a lot of Americans have kind of gotten into this position where their families don't have that history. Like my family lost
Right.
everything they ever worked for and then came to a new country, never speaking English or anything, and had to start over, right? And that's an experience in itself. And thank God America was there for that, because if it happens here, there's nowhere to run to. No, none of us are going to be able to flee with our kids to some bastion of freedom. It's not going to happen. This is it. We either stand up, we fight for it, or we lose it all, and our kids live in an authoritarian hell. And so, I'm sort of educated by that reality. I was raised by anti-communists, and that's sort of, what underpins a lot of my political theory and actions. It's why I detest white papers. I'm disgusted by most think tanks because they accomplish pretty much nothing. And me inside of my studio with a very small team accomplish
Right.
more on a daily basis, because we're focused on action, taking real wins and putting them on the board, because there's nothing to rally people like winning for them. How many times can we say we legitimately had a politician win for us? Almost never. The last time I felt like they were winning for me was basically Trump winning in 2016, and there was a series of policy things that were great. But aside from that, in my lifetime, I struggle to identify anything else. Maybe like I loved Ron Paul, but he didn't win, right? Like he had that election kind of taken from him, any chance of him getting it. But it's very few and far between is kind of the point. So anytime you can stack up wins for people, they rally to it. And that's kind of what's been happening for us.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen Matt Walsh's new movie, Am I Racist? I'm gonna have him on in a couple of weeks. That movie is gonna do more to fight DEI than the entire Republican Party combined, and it's not even gonna be
Yeah.
close. And to your point, you and I were just some jerk with a mic, but we can do so much more damage than my senator or my congressman or whomever.
Oh, 1,000%. The whole thing has changed, right? More people watch my videos or watch like Matt's content than watch CNN and MSNBC at
Yeah.
night. The power dynamic is different, and it just takes us recognizing that and recognizing the power we have. And that's kind of what we've done with this DEI and wokeness project in corporate America is like we recognize that power, we are going to use it, and we're going to make the media afraid of it. And that's kind of what's happened is the media is afraid of it. By proxy, the corporations are afraid of it because
Yep.
they're realizing, oh my gosh, they're doing numbers we're not doing. I do have to say, to your point about Am I Racist? I went to the premiere with Matt, and I've talked to Matt about this. Like, I think that what is happening with that movie is very, very critically important. It goes beyond DEI. It goes to sort of the cultural reality of our country. Because if that movie is the winner that I think it will be, because it's incredibly funny. Okay. Go see it in a theater. Do not wait till afterwards. See it in a theater, because the experience of seeing how it affects a large group of people is really interesting, because you start to lose some of those chains, these ideas that we should be proud of being a silent majority or something, which I think is the stupidest decision that conservatives have made over the last like 30 years. Is this idea we should celebrate being silent. It's the dumbest concept possible. You allow a very loud, angry, miserable group of people to control everything and control the direction of your country. So movies like this shift us back towards sanity and the idea that, hey, we don't need to be ashamed of believing in very common sense things. And
Right.
we can all sit around and laugh at these miserable, ridiculous people who have somehow taken power of the cultural institutions in our country.
I would disagree with you a little bit because I think COVID showed that conservatives are not the majority. Because if conservatives were everything close to the majority, none of that COVID bullshit would have happened.
I actually think that's a byproduct of the silent majority. People feeling like they have to get along to go along, and it's not even necessarily the conservatives or the silent majority. It's that just common sense is
Yes,
the
that's fair.
silent majority. And a lot of times it lacks courage. And that's what we've grown by conservatives celebrating the idea of a silent majority. Had we never celebrated it and we actually detested it quite openly, I don't think that people would think that it's a good idea to be silent on a large scale basis. If you think about DEI policies in corporate America, they're largely meant to accomplish one thing, and that's ideological conformity and to scare the other side into silence. That's really like the feature of it. And I think a lot of people lose that. They think like, oh, these are just woke people trying to advance whatever their priority is. Like, it's much deeper than that. On
Of
an
course, yes.
ideological level, it's about shutting people up.
No, it's my friend Jesse pointed out that every HR lady is basically the regime's operative, in that organization, keeping an eye and making sure that no one strays from a very narrow set of operating guidelines. And how these things work is if you have an ideologically dedicated minority and everyone else is just kind of going along to get along, that minority is going to win every time because they've got the skin in the game, they've got their eye on the ball, and everyone else just wants to kind of get their job done, go home to their families.
1000%. That's exactly what's going on. That was Jesse Kelly, right?
No, no, it's a friend of mine who's not famous, and, he's
Okay, I
being
was I
terrible.
was gonna say that sounds like Jesse Kelly.
That does sound like Jesse Kelly.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what's happening. These people are soldiers for a cause, and it kind of
Yes.
connects with what I was saying before with the universities. Like they come out knowing that is their explicit purpose. It's not to like just move up the corporate ladder to advance their lives and get a bigger salary like a lot of people in the past thought.
Right.
No, like they want to get to those positions not because of money, but because of their ability to further influence ideology.
Yeah. Folks, I wanna talk to you about Green Chef. Easy to use, quality products, something you'll enjoy, and I'm speaking from experience. Don't let back to school set back your nutrition because Green Chef makes it easy to stick to your healthy eating habits with a new, more flexible menu, over 35 customizable recipe options every week. And their new options include doubling your protein or doubling your veggies, or you can even swap to a plant-based protein. So if you're gluten-free or dairy-free or any of these other things, Green Chef has over 15 recipes every week to support those lifestyles and more. Take your clean routine further with 2 times the support because it's Green Chef's healthiest menu ever. And you also get access to thousands of top rated gyms and fitness studios worldwide from ClassPass. That's right. For a limited time, new Green Chef subscribers will also receive 50 free credits to use at ClassPass, which is about a month's worth of membership. Green Chef's quality whole foods have limited processed ingredients, which contribute to a healthy lifestyle. And if you think that eating clean can't taste good, have no fear. Green Chef recipes will have you swooning with every bite. They've also got calorie smart and keto ones, which is a great way to get in shape and stay lean. Each box is packed with foods that you can feel good about, like whole foods and vegetables, plus lean protein and whole grain options. Go to greenchef.com/maliceclass for half off your first box and 50 free credits with ClassPass. That's code MALICEClass at greenchef.com/maliceclass to get half off your first box and 50 free ClassPass credits. Green Chef is the #1 meal kit for eating well. Let's get back to the show. So let's talk about your specific wins because this is the other thing that has been kind of shocking to me. And you've kind of basically taken the bull by the horns and like, I'm going to put a stop to this once and for all. I can understand how if I'm Whole Foods or Starbucks or maybe even Apple, where I am trying to push my product toward a lefty urban audience, that I'm going to have certain trappings, right? But if my audience is like MAGA people, patriots, there's no reason for me as a corporation to have these views. It's really kind of a mismatch, just on a purely capitalist money making level. And I'm like, I was thinking to myself, conservatives have been sitting in your hands for a long time. There'll be one tweet from some, official in some company, and leftists will swarm, and that company will backtrack. But they can take a dump on the face of like the American flag, and conservatives will say nothing until Robby Starbuck came along. So I really want you to walk us through as specifically as you can what you had done and you're doing right now as we speak to. And here's the other thing: the things you're having them do, I think 2 years ago would have been impossible because during Black Lives Matter, when you had CrossFit, which is a gay or exercise company, the guy, the head of CrossFit, says, "We have nothing to do with this. We just want to have people do exercise." He got fired. But now they're actually publicly backpedaling. So please,
Yeah.
I will yield the floor to you.
That's interesting. CrossFit is?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that's funny. I didn't know that, but I can tell you this: we had been perusing CrossFit's pages and on LinkedIn, and we had actually a number of different pieces of material that had been sent to us. So they may have seen that we were looking through their
Oh,
LinkedIn pages. I hadn't heard that they were backpedaling yet, but that's
no,
funny.
no,
I
I'm
wonder if
saying these
there's.
other companies that you met, they haven't, but these other companies have. And that's
Oh,
what I'm
okay.
saying
Yeah,
is
yeah,
a
yeah.
few
No,
years
these other
ago, they would
companies have.
never
I
do
wouldn't be
that
surprised if
publicly.
CrossFit does
Okay.
change their ways. But yeah, so basically, this all started kind of by happenstance. My wife and I, we had reported early on about the Vanderbilt transgender clinic, and then gave the story, over to Matt Walsh, and he kind of took it even further, and then worked with Matt to get the law passed here in Tennessee so we
Can
could
you
ban
explain to people
transgender.
what that is? Because that's very key.
Yeah, so basically, a lot of people in Tennessee had no idea that there was a pediatric transgender clinic here in Tennessee, and it was operating out of Vanderbilt. And essentially, they were hormone treatments, puberty blockers, recommendations to go across state lines to be able to get, you know, worse than that. And so we said, this is unacceptable. We live in Tennessee. We have a super majority here in the legislature. What the hell is going on? So, we tried to raise the alarm to everybody we knew that this is unacceptable. And Matt took it even further and he got some undercover stuff there. And then we worked with Matt to do a rally here where we had, I think it was like 5,000 people show up to the legislature to make their voices heard. And that had quite an impact on the Republican legislators there, because keep in mind, a couple of years earlier, there was a bill to try to ban these types of things, and it did not get enough votes in a Republican legislature. Okay. And in fact, I'll
But can
never
I say
forget
one
this.
thing? This is
Yeah.
also Tennessee. This isn't like New England liberal
Yeah.
republicanism.
No,
This is Tennessee.
Tennessee. Tennessee. And so a couple years earlier, they couldn't get this passed, right? And I go back and watch the tapes of the hearings, and I see a bunch of Republican electeds groveling and thanking this lady who runs the pediatric transgender clinic for helping educate them. And I'm like, my mind's blown. I don't know what these people are thinking, but I do know that it's our job to disabuse them of whatever notion they've come
Yeah.
up with in that moment. So we go, okay, it's time for some real education. So we brought in these young women who had gone through a lot of these things well before they were 18 and had them meet with legislators. So the legislators had to look them in the eyes and see what was done to them and hear what was done to them. And then we went along, obviously we had some great members of the legislature introducing the legislation, getting behind it, like the leaders, Lamberth and Jack Johnson here. They got behind what we wanted to do. And having those, 5,000 some odd people descend upon the Capitol and us doing the rally, it had a big psychological effect. And I learned a lot from that experience of like using the power of the followings that we have online to create real change. And so this year we did something very different. We helped get a law passed to get the death penalty on the table for child rapists. If they rape a child under 13, it's like it's on the table now. If it's an indisputable case where it's very clear what happened, that's on the table now. So we can use these online followings to harness real power. And so when the DEI thing came up, I already had my issues with it because I actually knew what DEI was and all these issues a lot earlier than I think a lot of other people did, because we've lived in Tennessee now about 5-6 years. And before that lived in Calabasas. So my older kids went to a very like elite private school in California. And it was basically filled with libs. Like I think our family and Scott Baio and his wife were the only families that were not, raging lefties at this school. Right. And so me and Scott were like a thorn in the side of the school. But at that school, they had a white privileged person come in without telling parents and come speak to elementary school students. And that was like my first foray where I was like, okay, I need to understand this ideology. What's behind this? What the hell's going on? Right. And it turns out the person that they brought in was like this raging activist. And so I said, okay, well, it's time for us to ignite our activism and put a stop to this lunacy. And so I really went deep on figuring out kind of the roots of the ideology and everything, because I wanted to understand if it was happening in California, I knew it was going to spread everywhere else.
Yep.
Because the NEA and these other teachers unions, they all use California as
Yep.
a testing ground.
Yeah.
And so lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. So when I looked at the issue of DEI, though, it seemed like all of our institutions were failing. I kept waiting for like some group or some electeds to step up and do the right thing, and it just was not happening. So, I had talked to somebody who had an interesting story from Tractor Supply. They worked there for a long time, and they said they're kind of informing me on all the crazy policies, and I just couldn't believe it. So we go and we verify all of it. We realize not only is it true, but it's even worse than the person had kind of put to us. And I said, if it's happening there, it is happening everywhere, because that is the most Americana vibe you can get, is walking into a Tractor Supply. And I went there on a regular basis. Like, we've got cattle, we've got chickens here. I go to Tractor Supply, and unknowingly, you're funding all this crazy stuff like pride events in your own state, again, in a red state like Tennessee. So I said, all right, we've got to establish exactly how we bring down these policies and look at the boycotts of the past, identify the failures, the things they did wrong, and let's fix it. Let's make this something that is successful. So I created sort of, I guess for lack of a better term, like a thesis for how this was going to work, how to make a boycott be successful. And so, it's important that you have these first 3 wins that we had, because these showed our teeth and our ability to make things very uncomfortable for a company. So it started with Tractor Supply. It lasted almost 3 weeks, and then the company said uncle, and they gave up all their crazy policies,
What
right?
did you do? What did you do them?
Essentially, we went through and exposed every policy, every crazy thing they had funded, every crazy group they had partnered with, and put it into one video that's about, I think it's like 7 to 9 minutes long, something like that. But a big part of the strategy was, do not make this a news story for one cycle. This needs to be dripped out over a month so that people
Yep.
understand exactly what's going on, right? And that you can't have the PR strategy of let's wait for this to blow over, because it's not going to blow over, right? This is daily information that we're dropping. So that initial video didn't have everything. It had a lot of the crazy stuff, but we save a lot of other crazy stuff for that next month, right? And so that's a
Can you give hold
combination
on,
of
hold on.
videos.
Can you give people an idea of what you're categorizing as crazy? Because I think,
Yeah.
again, Americans are naive, and
Yeah.
when you say they're gonna think, "Oh, they just have some kind of affirmative action program." It's so much worse than that. Please
No, it's so
tell.
much worse than that.
Yeah.
So, for starters, like they supported and gave money to a group that supports illegal immigration, where the founder had said that one of their top explicit goals was stopping deportations under Trump. They funded pride events here in Tennessee. They funded something called the Oasis Center, which has a group for kids to meet who believe that they're trans, and they get to talk to adults about all of those issues and stuff and get advice about what they should do. We're talking about Tractor Supply, by the way, like
Right, yeah, yeah.
Tractor Supply, which, by the way, ironically does not sell tractors. And beyond that, they've got, I mean, there's a ton of other affiliations that are just bizarre. The trainings are things we're going to talk very broadly now, because I don't want to pick too much on Tractor Supply,
Sure.
because they did the hardest thing out of all the companies, which was they went first and they
Yeah.
flipped entirely. They did the best
Okay.
job changing. And I actually just got an email from a Tractor Supply employee like a couple hours ago, where they were writing like in depth about how grateful they are for the massive changes there's been. But they had trans flags in their distribution centers in Kentucky. Like, it was ludicrous. But what we see across the board at these companies is these insane trainings where they demand ideological conformity around
Right.
pronouns, and men being allowed to go in the women's bathrooms. And we're talking about like companies that are explicitly conservative. The employee base is conservative, but they're expected to shut their mouths and accept a man walking in the bathroom with them to use the restroom while they're like wearing a dress and look absolutely like a man, but are clearly mentally disturbed. But the company can't admit that. And, you go down the line, it's crazy support after crazy training, after crazy ideological structure at the company. And you've got these groups too. I mean, there's a racial part of this as well that is just explicitly anti-white. At some of the companies that we've seen, they make as many negative statements about white people as they possibly can. They recommend books like White Fragility, which is featured heavily in Matt Walsh's new movie.
Yes.
You should definitely check that out. You've got a ton of Ibram Kendi references, which blow my mind. Okay, so I've taken probably at this point about 100 of these DEI training programs. It's more than 100, but I don't know the exact number, because I want to understand what the hell's in them, right?
Sure, sure.
And so they almost all provide a resources section. And you
Yes.
can find uniformly, I have not to this day found one that recommended anything even right of center. Okay, never as a resource.
Or
It
even
won't
moderate.
surprise anybody. But the number one resource I have seen is Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist.
Yes.
And you've got to appreciate a certain irony in massive global corporations recommending a book that says to be anti-racist, you have to be anti-capitalist. Okay, because I
But
think that's
can I say something,
right.
Robbie? You're
Huh?
gonna agree with this. One of my favorite tweets is I said, "Capitalism is so much more effective that corporate America has done a far better job of spreading Maoism than the Chinese Communist Party could ever dream of."
Oh, 100%. It's hilarious, though. And in one hand, it's hilarious. On the other hand, it's like deeply concerning, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't even think that some of them realize what they're doing.
Of
But
course
you've
not.
got these people within the company who, like, I'll put it this way. Okay. So we offer every company off the record conversation with me between the executive and me. And a lot of the companies have taken us up on that. And almost across the board, the company's executives did not know what
Right.
the hell was going on in their companies. And they always have this like shocked reaction to everything I'll bring forward. And I'm like sending them images at the same time we're talking, because they're like, there's no way, you must be confused. I'm like, hold on, I'll text it to you. And I text it to them. And then they're like, wow, I had no idea. Do you know who's responsible for that? And so like, I'm like informing them on what the hell's going on in their own company. And that
But
should tell people something. And I think that it's a symptom of the disease, but it's not even the whole picture. It's like, I think a lot of these executives don't realize just how explicitly activist laden their corporations have
But
become.
do you know what it is? It's that they're told daily by the corporate press, gaslit every day, that DEI is just about treating black people and immigrants with respect, that this LGBT stuff is about gay people not being afraid to get beat up and being treated with dignity, and they watch the news and they believe it. I mean,
And it's just
and that's the
stupid.
extent of
I
it.
mean, it's just stupid.
Yes, but I think that's what's in their head. That's because it's that makes more sense to them than the reality that every white person's a racist. Like, what are you talking about?
Well, that goes kind of hand in hand with something that I've thought. I wonder personally if this would have been successful what we did had I not been able to say that I'm Latino. I
Right.
think that actually carries like a lot of weight for the executives that I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah.
look, I'm Latino and my kids would benefit from this stuff. And I'm telling you, knock it off. This is ridiculous, you know? And I think there's actually something to that, that they've been so beaten into a corner to be
Yep.
afraid of being seen as racist in the other direction, that they're
Yes.
perfectly fine accepting racism toward white people. And see, like, there's a lot of honest actors out there who might not, be like, exactly the type of person you would expect to be the messenger, but there's a lot of minorities that are sick of this. And like, I'll put it this way, I don't want my kids to wonder if they're diversity hires.
Yeah.
I want them to know they achieved whatever they achieve in life based on merit, and that's something every parent should want for their child. If you want that, you should explicitly oppose these policies, because America has essentially been, I'll put it this way, in the 90s, right? In the 90s, we had some of the best numbers in Pew polling and Gallup research on racial harmony. Okay. By and large, most people just did not care anymore about race. They were just like, yeah, it's cool, no big deal. Like, we treat each other like Americans. That was the overarching theory and premise, at least. Illegal immigration was nowhere near the numbers it's at now. And I think that, large part, people were just like kind of willing to accept, like, hey, we judge each other on character and everything else, right? And in America, there's not this like gay bashing thing happening all over. Nobody cares. If you're an adult, you're gay, knock yourself out. That's fine. Go be gay. Nobody's getting in your face at work because you're gay. Okay. What people are upset about is people sexualizing children and
Right.
forcing their sexual preferences on everybody else. I don't want to know if you like what type of sex you like to have with your wife. I don't want to know if you have sex with a guy. I don't want to know. Like, it's none of my business. I want to go to work and do my job, and I want you to do your job, and you can deal with your personal sexual situation on your own time. That's kind of my view of it. And I think that's most people's view, is they just don't care and they don't want to have a conversation about it.
Except for Jeffrey Toobin.
Yeah, he wants to put it on Zoom.
Folks, men's wardrobes were due for a radical reinvention, and Rhone stepped up to the challenge. Their commuter collection is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible set of products known to man. You guys all look a mess. Here's where Rhone can help you out. Rhone helps you get ready for any occasion with the commuter collection. It offers the world's most comfortable pants, dress shirts, quarter zips, and polos, and you never have to worry about what to wear when you have the Rhone commuter collection. Why? Their comfortable four-way stretch fabric provides breathability and flexibility, so you're free to enjoy what life throws your way, from your commute to work to your 18 holes of golf. It's time to feel confident without the hassle, because Rhone has wrinkle release technology. So that means wrinkles disappear as you stretch and you wear the products. It's just that easy. And there's even more. With their Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, you'll be smelling fresh and clean all day long. Top of that, Rhone is 100% machine washable. You can ditch the dry cleaner altogether. It's a great product at a reasonable price. Their commuter collection can get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. Head to Rhone.com/malice, RHONE.com/malice. Use promo code malice. You get 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to RHONE.com/malice. Use code malice. It's time to find your corner office comfort. Let's get back to the show. But I think there's something even worse to what you're saying, in that worse than your kids wondering if they're DI hires are the people who know that they are, because their entire role is, I will fight tooth and nail to make sure that this company keeps these policies, because
Yeah.
if this company doesn't keep these policies, I'm out on the street And I'm perfectly interchangeable than these other, foaming at the mouth radicals who just left Vassar or whatever. So I think people don't appreciate that when these types of people get into these organizations, it's going to be really hard to get rid of them because it's their entire salary, it's their entire roof over their head is on their lines. So I would love to have you continue because again, with you reaching out to these companies and they're making these turns, this is what was shocking to me, where I'm like, I got to talk to this guy. They're doing this publicly. A lot of times corporations like, oh, well, we'll look into it. And then like quietly they change it because they don't make a fuss. They're replying to you like, yep, you're right. We're 180ing, which
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen before in this direction. So please
Because
go
we
on.
demand it. That's why it's
Okay.
happening. Like the alternative for these companies, if you don't acknowledge the change, is that we're going to go forward with our initial story. Like that there's no blackmail to that. It's just we're going to report the facts one way or the other. So you need to tell us on the record if you're changing or not. If you're not changing, we're going forward with the story as is. And in many cases, they get to see what that story looks like. And I think they fundamentally understand that it's going to be extremely damaging, when people see that you funded, some pride event where, let's say, a drag queen tells a group that involves children, if you get wet for me, I'll get wet for you. Like,
Oh
I think they
my
understand
God.
fundamentally that's going to be a problem if that hits the internet, right? And so they decide,
Wait,
whatever
did you
they
just?
decide.
I gotta ask. I'm hoping. Is that you're just making that up, or is that an actual example?
That's an actual example, and it will come out in one of our future videos, which is why I mentioned it. Yeah,
I know that this is you have to laugh because it's like you swim in these circles. This is what you watch all day,
it's
and that's sort of why you
insane.
get numb to it. But like it's it's so just leave the kids out of it. It's
It's
not that
like it
hard.
blows your mind. It blows your mind. It really does. Like when I first saw the video, that video specifically I'm referencing, I just like, you don't want to live in the same country as these
Yeah, yeah,
people.
right, exactly.
Like if you believe this is okay to sit in front of a bunch of kids and
Wait, not just
go that
okay, heroic.
direction,
They think it's heroic.
which makes it even more insane,
Of
and so
course.
it's like people like us have a responsibility at this point. I no longer think of it as like, oh, we're doing good thing. It's a responsibility. We have a responsibility to stop this stuff in its tracks. We're the adults. If we don't stop it, we're resigning the next generation to just live in hell. And I'm not okay with that, so if it costs me whatever it costs me that. I don't care. I'm a dad. I've got 4 kids now. Like, I want them to live in a sane country. So whatever it takes to provide that, I'm going to do it. And I think that's another thing, like, I'm disappointed by is that the lack of recognition some men have in what time it is. It's sad. Like my 15-year-old daughter has more courage than most men. Like, she's not afraid to go out and wear a MAGA hat when we go shopping. Like, she's not afraid of that. You know how many men in our country are afraid to wear a hat? Like,
Right, right.
I understand fundamentally like what they're describing their fear as,
It's just funny
but
because
they
even
should.
Biden's not scared to wear a MAGA hat anymore.
Yeah, Biden's he'll do it, right? But like, think about how messed up that really is. That like, there's teenage girls in this country with more courage than a bunch of grown men who are afraid to even state who they're going to vote for.
But hold on,
Like,
let
we
me
need to
push.
get back to a normal place where people that fear doesn't exist anymore.
But I gotta tell you, I'll defend them to some extent. Their fears aren't based on nothing. Like,
I know.
they know very well, and I know at a certain point, if everyone's scared, then this is how they win, but a lot of these people, they know like, if the what do I get out of it? I say I'm gonna vote for Trump, someone says, right? I looked at it as a complete freak at work. People regard me as a literal Nazi. Like, all the costs are enormous. You can see how on an individual level, a lot of these men who are dads or whatever are like, "You know what? It's not worth it." And I understand the psychology and why it's effective as a mechanism of control.
Oh yeah, no, it's an effective mechanism of control, absolutely, which is exactly why men should stop adhering to it. Do you want to be controlled? It's like you were made to be a protector. You were made to be
Right.
something much greater than most men have accepted their role to be in life. And so my challenge to them is like, at least have enough courage to be as courageous as my 15-year-old daughter
Right.
who's not afraid to do this. Like, there's things you can lose, absolutely, especially depending on what part of the country you're in. The trick is understanding that if you are a leader that you were born to be, you have the ability to inspire others to do similar things. And like, I'll put it this way, what we're doing with DEI, there's a lot of negative stuff that goes along with it, but The most positive thing isn't even the company's changing. The most positive thing is the conversation has changed. I have
Yes.
seen so many different employees reach out openly to me and say, for years, I've had an issue with whatever the policy is at that company. I've been afraid to say anything. I got the courage to say something now. So, men standing up and being sort of fearless about whatever the consequences might be, or maybe you do have fear, but you overcome that and you just kind of do the right thing, right? It has an effect on what other people do. They look at you and they go, okay, maybe I should do that. And the reality is, if we all do the right thing, there's no power left in these people who want to call us Nazis or whatever it is they want to call us. And honestly, at this point, I think most normal people, they look at whatever's being thrown, like, you're a bigot, you're a transphobe, and they don't take any of it seriously anymore. Like, why would you? Why would you take any of this seriously anymore? These people are very clearly not serious people. So why take them seriously? I think we just have to use our levers of power very effectively against them. And we're much more powerful collectively. I think there's things we can learn from the left, okay? You've got a group of people on the left who are willing to glue themselves to a counter at a coffee shop because they provide the wrong type of milk. And that's a real reference. Like, I've seen a video of this person glues himself to a coffee counter because they have the wrong kind of milk. On the right, what are you willing to do something crazy for? And it's very few things, which is probably good. However, let's roll that back just a tiny bit. What are you willing to just even show up and use your voice for? And it gets to be, a list that's much smaller than it is on the left. They'll show up for a lot of things. I think maybe we need to start to harness a little bit more of that collective energy to get past this point in time where the left really has a stranglehold over cultural institutions. So, it's part of our concept when it comes to companies is that you never want to attack them as a group. Everybody's stronger in groups. So apply that to political processes too, because what we do is we hunt and pick off companies one by one, because doing it that way,
Yep.
there's nobody to save you. We're coming for your company. Here's what we know about your company. Here's the full dossier. Like, this is what you're facing. They have to answer for it, right? If we went to a business conglomerate of 100
Right.
companies and we told them all, we're going to do this, you all better change right now, nothing would happen, because all 100 of them together would go, well, F you, we're not going to respond to that. And so it's the same theory in politics. The more we're individualists, and I know, like, don't get me wrong, I care about individualism. Like, I very much do. However, tactically, we have to understand that sometimes we have to stand as a collective and do so really, in a way that is prolonged if we want to be effective and not be easily picked off by the left, because that's how they got a hold of the cultural institutions. They collectively work together to do it. They hire their own people. They're not worried about the integrity of, not hiring the best person for the job or whatever. They're just like, we're going to put our people there. And we're meanwhile sitting there as individualists going like, we're going to take things on a one by one sort of basis. And we lost that fight in the cultural institution. So if we want them back, we have to understand how we got there.
To your point as well, like Tractor Supply, it is really hard to be that first company. It's so much easier after that, because now you're not the only one. If you're by the time you're the 10th company, it's just like, okay, I could already see from these 9 others what the fallout's gonna be, and it's gonna cost me something to stick this to where am
And
now.
I think that's what we hit today is number 10. I don't know if
Oh,
you
that's
saw that right
wonderful.
before I came on. I announced a new company, Stanley Black and Decker. So
Oh, so let's
believe it or
talk about
not,
this. Go ahead, sorry, please.
yeah, no, believe it or not, Stanley Black and Decker, they own Stanley Tools, they own Black and Decker, they own DeWalt, and they own Craftsman. Okay, they own about a dozen other tool brands aside from those, but those are like the big 4 tool brands. They're all owned by the same company. They had gone full woke. Like, I'm talking like they had a pronoun contest within the office. Whoever got the most employees to add pronouns to their emails won a package of tool prizes, which I think is funny because, like, the people who are concerned about pronouns really use that many tools.
Wait, but
You
hold
know,
on.
like,
Well, yeah, they use one, but
that seemed a little weird to me. I
it
mean,
in all seriousness, what's really funny is there's that joke about if a guy has a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail, and this is almost literally the case here. That, like, well, we're just gonna take this hammer company and put it in there as well.
I mean, they wanted to turn everything. And that's the thing is like, that's the reason why it's very clear. They have a very conservative consumer base, right? Or at
Right?
least normie consumer base that doesn't want to pay for transgender treatments for children, right? But that's exactly what people were doing without realizing it. You bought a product from them, it was going toward the healthcare plans of employees. And that healthcare plan includes coverage for transitioning kids. Okay. They were supporting a company that participates in the HRC, whose president explicitly said last week that Trump hates America and poses basically the idea that any Republican in office is some sort of threat. I mean, that's the sort of rhetoric that the HRC puts out there. Is it's all explicitly sort of demonizing Republicans. So why would any company with a conservative consumer base associate themselves with a group like that, where they're explicitly anti-conservative? It makes no logical sense except for as an ideology where that it's like party comes before everything else. So for us, it's a very simple sort of math equation. Like, you need these customers. We influence these customers. We will tell them the truth about the values that you're espousing and what you're spending money on, or you can fix it, and we'll tell them about you fixing it. But we're going to tell them a story one way or the other. We're either going to tell them what you're doing or we're going to tell them how you're fixing it. So, you pick type of deal. And with these companies, like it's honestly ludicrous. Like, a tool company, what purpose do they have funding a Pride event? It makes no sense. Like, there's no logical point where somebody goes, I really wonder where my tool company's at on Pride.
Well, maybe they're selling like locks and chains and stuff.
I don't think that's what they were doing.
What I'm curious about is I know you've published, I believe you have, please correct me if I'm wrong, like the emails that you've used and the back and forth with these companies. How do you strike the correct tone? Because I'm sure you don't want to come off as a thug, and I'm sure
Yeah.
you also want to make clear that you mean business. And I'm sure there's part of you that wants to allow them to save face and not just to give them the opportunity to do the right thing. So how do you word it?
Yeah, well, there actually is an art to that because number one, we never want to come off blackmailing because we're not blackmailing these companies. We're just like, we have a story. Okay, so we treat it like investigative journalism. We come to them and we say, hey, this is who we are. You might be familiar with sort of the stories of what's been out there about our work with other companies, and we just want to have a conversation with you guys, let you guys know that we are preparing to do a story on the company. We want to make sure it's fair and accurate. So we plan to, kind of let you know this is what we're looking at. This is what we've investigated. And we want to know kind of where things are at, because for this story to be accurate, we need to know if this still is the policy of the company or if you plan to change things.
Wait, I got to interrupt you. I have to interrupt you because I was a business major. I worked in corporate America for a few years. I don't think people listening to this appreciate how scary it is when you're like atop of one of these corporations and a reporter says, we're doing a story, right? Like right away, it's like, oh shit, because the eye of Sauron is on you. And then when the reporter says, these are the beats, this isn't a drill. Like, it's happening. So for these companies, like, they want to fly under the radar. They want to be like, oh, come buy our product. It makes your house nice, blah, blah, blah. Robbie comes along, or CNN or the New York Times, and they're like, here's what I have. Here's where we're going with unless you change it. That really, for them, isn't something they can blow off, as opposed to if me or you tweet at them, whatever it is. It's like, yeah, that's nice. We could blow it off on social media. It's very, very different dynamic.
The story angle is really their choice,
Yeah.
and that's the ability for them to save face, because again, we're not after destruction. If we were, I would never contact the companies. I
Yeah.
already know what we're running is correct. It's really more of an opportunity for them to have some self reflection and go like, okay, actually this does sound crazy when you put it that way.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to change some things, right? And so sometimes they'll say, hey, we want an off the record between an executive and you to discuss this, or they'll say, you know what, actually we're talking about changes already, which is my favorite one. That's one that like never ceases to amaze me. I'm like, if anybody believes all these companies were just talking about this and waiting until the week that we email them to
Yeah.
announce their changes, like that's as likely as a horse giving birth to a unicorn.
Yeah.
Okay.
What great time.
We just got that as a question from a Fortune reporter. They were like, are you really responsible? Because a couple of these companies that we talked to said they were already thinking about changes. I'm like, if you believe that, and I know you don't, but if you do, then I have some land to sell you, and it's gorgeous. It's in Siberia. You're going to love it. It's really tropical.
But it's like saying I'm thinking of running for president. It's like, that's nice. I'm thinking about it right now, Robbie. Okay, now what?
Fantastic. But when did you do it? Well, like,
Right.
when are you going to do it? And so, we've got them doing this. I really do think it's going to escalate from here. To kind of your point of what you were talking about, the fear for executives, it's very real, and I've actually had one admit this to me, very high end company worth over $100 billion. And they said to me, I got to be honest, Robby, you've been very pragmatic. These have been very, very, sort of sensible conversations we've had. But I got to tell you, when we got that first email, all
Yeah.
of the executives here were freaking out like chickens with their head cut off. We thought
Yep.
you were going to run
I
with the
knew it.
story right away. Like, this dude's a bat out of hell. He's
I
just going
knew
to
it.
go for it. It's going to be mayhem. There's going to be all these negative stories, and customer service is going to be flooded because the word got around. Like, when we did John Deere, when we did Tractor Supply, when we did Harley Davidson, like, customer service was filled up for a long time. We're talking
Can we
for weeks and
can,
weeks.
can
Okay,
we pause
so
on this? Can we pause on this?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because it they say Twitter is not real life, and that's true to a point. But if you sat down like Joe Sixpack and you're like, no, no, Harley Davidson's one of these companies that got infected with this, they would laugh in your face. It's like, okay, you're a ridiculous far right conspiracy theorist. What are you talking about, Alex Jones? But it's Harley effing Davidson.
Yeah.
Can you
Here's
talk
the
about
trick
what
though,
happened there?
too. Yeah, here's the trick is, like, it wasn't just on X. Yeah, I knew if it lived only on X, it was
Right.
not going to be effective. So we pushed it out to the mainstream. Like, every mainstream news organization covered what was going on because the numbers were there, the people were there, and so there was no ignoring the story. We had this in, like, every publication you can think of. Wall Street Journals ran a number of stories on it. New York Times was just here at my house doing a profile on me.
Oh boy, that's gonna be
Bloomberg,
great.
so on and so forth. And as much as I detest a lot of these news organizations, because I know what they've done, like, there still is a usefulness to it,
Sure, sure.
in terms of using it to win these battles. And
Yeah.
so we are at that point now where we've had enough wins that I do think going forward, you're going to see more just sort of like self delete, like, let's not wait till we get to that point. Enough companies have gotten there. Are we really going to wait for somebody to come? Because it may not be me. At some point, somebody's going to just copy everything we're doing and do so very effectively. And I embrace that. Knock yourself out. Go do it. Like, less work for us. I just want to bring sanity back. And the best way to do that is sort of this model. I haven't seen anything else work, which is really just holding up a mirror. That's kind of how I think of what we do is we take a mirror and we hold it up to the ugly face of corporate America, who has been sticking on different types of makeup to please different types of people for so long that they don't realize that if you look at the full picture, you look like a really ugly animal. And so we're here to give you a makeup wipe and say, like, let's fix this. It's your choice. If you want to stay ugly, fine. We're going to show people that ugly picture. But if you want to, clean up, we're happy to show people the cleaned up new version of you.
To your point about the executives, I'm sure you realize, but some people might not. If they are hearing from a corporate journalist, usually it is done already. It's a wrap, and it'll be like at 4:50, and they're like, "Here's the article running.
Yeah.
We want to hear any response from you. My deadline's at 5." And at that point, there's nothing they could do because that's how they operate. So the fact that you are kind of exploiting the trauma that corporate journalists have inflicted on corporate America and keeping them so-called, honest, in reality towing the line, you get to exploit how they've been battered and be like, hey, hey, I'm not going to hit you this time. I'm giving you an opportunity to do the right thing. And then it's like, oh crap, like this actually is different from how I'm usually being treated. Are you expecting the New York Times to give you the George Zimmerman treatment and like lighten your photo so much that it looks basically like a
Oh, you will see. I mean, I honestly, like, I will say this is probably somebody who's like, why do you think a lot of, if you had to boil this down to one thing, like, why this works for you to do this? I think God gives everybody gifts, and it's kind of like your job to figure out what that is and how you use it to your advantage. And for me, I would say, like, my number one gift is I do not care. I don't care. They could write whatever about me. They could frame me as whatever, like put orange on my face. Like, I don't care. Knock yourself out. They could do whatever they want. I will find a way to use it effectively, So, I think that's probably where I'm at with a lot of the media coverage. I will say this: what I think has kept it going and keeps the success up is that for corporate media, we're crack. Like, they've
yeah, yeah.
told me at every different outlet, man, the story we did with you guys on that thing, it got us the most page views we've had on one of our stories in the corporate realm in like forever, right? So when you're delivering page views and clicks because your story is interesting, they can't give up the drug. Like, you're the crack they need. And so every day they're checking in, like, is there another company? Got another company for us? And it's like, we'll get you another company. We'll let you know, So there's a beauty to that too, because you keep it going in that larger, realm. You're reaching a lot of people who normally don't think about this stuff, and they are having to confront the fact that there is some truly crazy stuff, because it's sort of like, the reason we did the War on Children film is there was a lot of people who didn't believe there were these really grotesque drag shows for kids happening. They didn't believe that there were kids getting double mastectomies at 13. They didn't believe any of this, right? They didn't believe that there was a communist teachers union in Colorado that was the largest teachers union in the state. All of these things collectively sound so absurd that you're like, it's hard to wrap your head around. So when we made the movie, it was like to show people in one spot, one sitting, here's everything. And it gives you that resource to wake up those people in your life who maybe can't believe it's real, because it's undeniable when you watch the film. It's all based in fact, and it's and that's what the media at large hated about the movie, is like there was nothing to poke holes in. Everything
There's
was fact
receipts.
based.
You had
Yeah.
receipts. I think it's because people are trained since childhood in government schools and in the media that human beings are basically good and we're all pretty much the same. So when you think of like what's the worst thing you would ever do, it never enters your head to do any of these things to kids. Like you could think of, okay, you come home, someone's in bed with your wife, you shoot the guy. Like that's as far as most people can get. Or like I'm broke, I'm going to shoplift. But the things that are just gratuitous and so over the top in terms of their depravity, it would never enter a normal person's head. So unless you show them the footage, they're going to assume, oh, you're being hyperbolic,
Yeah.
or this is something you read, some boomer sent you from an email chain that never really ended up happening. Hey folks, Michael Malice here. You might know me as a Twitter troll, terrible author, insufferable podcaster, but I'm also an underwear model, and the underwear that I model and wear every day is Sheath underwear. If you go to sheathunderwear.com, use promo code Malice, you get 20% off and you can be inside my pants. Why I love Sheath is they have special dual pouch technology for both parts of your male anatomy. It sounds weird. The first time I tried them on, I'm like, what is this? And now I literally wear them every day. The great thing about Sheath, it was developed by an Iraq war veteran. And overseas, it gets really, really hot. And Bobby decided, all right, what can I do to make sure I'm not suffering here in this heat? And thanks to his research, you can be comfortable in the comfort of your own home. It's great for cold weather. It's great for hot weather. It keeps you secure and comfortable. And there's something really exciting about going on a job interview, going on a date, doing a podcast, knowing that your underwear has you in its grip, nice and secure and comfortable. Go to sheathunderwear.com, use promo code Malice. You get 20% off, and you can get one step closer to looking as much like a hunk as myself. Let's get back to the show. I'm just curious again, can you specifically talk to Harley Davidson and what
Yeah.
their policies were? Because that's the one that I think a lot of people are like, you've got to be kidding me.
Oh man, Harley has the sole true believer of the CEOs at the companies we've targeted. He is a full-on radical. So he co-founded the B Team with Richard Branson. The B Team's explicit purpose is forcing these woke policies and ideologies into corporate America. So they supported the Equality Act, which again is something that would force men into women's sports and men into women's spaces like their bathrooms or their locker rooms. And we're talking about in school and things like that.
Yeah.
So it's not, the Equality Act is one of those bills where it's grotesquely named, because really it's like naming a bill like vote yes if you love puppies Act, and then inside the bill it's like, yo, we're going to murder puppies now. And so anybody who votes against it, they're like, he voted against the vote yes if you love puppies Act. It's
It's
like, yeah,
Orwellian.
because it said inside we were going to murder puppies if we passed it. It's kind of like that with the Equality Act. Nothing about it's about equality. It's about stealing equality, actually. But so Harley Davidson was in favor of that. They were in favor of the bathroom policy at Target through the B Team, which was the group the CEO co-founded. They had done trainings explicitly for white males, Harley Davidson, and they bragged about it too in their sustainability report. So white men had to go to white men only diversity training. Okay.
No.
Think about that. Like how crazy that is.
Oh my
A
God.
racially segregated diversity training for white men.
Good Lord.
And
Okay.
so there's a whole company, by the way, built around this. It's a white men diversity training company. And so we pulled all the receipts of what they do at these trainings. They were a company that recommended white fragility. So that was in the resources section. They had, really their whole sustainability report we laid out from top to bottom was absolutely insane. So he wanted to turn the company to all electric bikes by 2030. Does that make sense to you
Wait,
for
what?
Harley
Harley?
Davidson? Yeah,
By 2030? Like in 6
yeah.
years?
That was the CEO's goal by 2030, all electric.
Oh my god. Jeez,
Does that
but
make any sense?
of course it doesn't make sense, but it's just also not on brand.
Yeah, so they had, he did all these speeches where he loved to brag about how woke he was, and in one of them, he called himself the Taliban of sustainability,
What
which
does
is
that mean? Like
a
women aren't allowed to
progressive
ride the
word for
bikes?
wokeness. Huh? What'd you say?
Wom Does that mean women aren't allowed to ride the bikes? Is that what he's saying?
No, it's actually, if people really boil down what he's saying when he calls himself the Taliban of sustainability, what he's saying is, I'm a terrorist who is willing to do anything
Oh,
necessary to advance my ideology. That's what it means to me. If you're saying you're the Taliban of sustainability, that's how I hear it. I hear it as you're a terrorist willing to do whatever you need to advance your ideology. And sustainability for these people, these globalists, it's really just a buzzword for all the woke policies
yeah, yeah.
because sustainability is like the catch all for it. That's why the reports are called sustainability reports. So, with a lot of these companies, read the sustainability report and you're going to find where a lot of the bodies are buried. You're going to see a lot of the companies that they donate to. Like, so they donated a lot to United Way there. United Way, I've exposed before for having extremely horrifically racist trainings based around DEI, and these trainings are just absurd top to bottom. It's every crazy like dream you could think a leftist would have for advancing ideological conformity into one training, and it's ludicrous. So I already had exposed this. It's a 21-day racial justice program that they had done at John Deere as well. And so with them, they were also giving tons of money to United Way. Both groups, John Deere and Harley Davidson, were giving money there. So it's all kind of incestuous in that DEI world, and they all hate me. I mean, like, they really hate me in that world right now, which they should. This is their grift at the end of the day, and somebody's
Like I was
causing
saying, yeah.
harm to it. You know.
But yeah, I gotta tell you, man, like I hear a lot of what you're saying, but my money's on the Taliban. They got a pretty good track record.
They do have a good track record. However, I would say we're at a point in history where people are fed up. They're just
Yes,
tired.
yes.
They're tired of all of this. And I think people want normalcy again. And that's the interesting thing is I think if I was trying to advocate for these companies to take on my political positions, it would not work. It would
Right.
fail. But I'm actually just advocating for just normal. I'm like, yo, let's just be neutral. Let's be normal, and that's it. And I think
And I
most people can agree on that.
and I
Like,
I think a
let's
lot of
act
these
normal.
I think increasing numbers of companies will be happy to have cover to do this because they did have a gun to their head. If you did not have that BLM square in 2020, like, you're in real trouble because now you support police killing innocent black people was the argument. And now if they look around and they see, wait a minute, I don't have to do this. I'm not going to have a cost if I back down. In fact, I'll have a cost if I stay the course. It's really easy to give people the space that they need to do what should be done to begin with.
Exactly right. We're giving them cover. And honestly, I mean, if you're an executive right now, we're in an economy that's not fantastic,
Right.
and you need every excuse to cut down on your costs. So you could cut that whole department, cut your DEI department, fire them all tomorrow. You're going to save yourself money and a headache. At the end of the day, there's really no reason for them to keep these people around. In principle, the good things they try to sell about DEI were things that existed before DEI, like, let's not discriminate on the basis of skin color.
Right.
Okay, yeah, before DEI existed, we had anti-discrimination laws that were in place for exactly that reason. However, since DEI took over, now we explicitly do discriminate on race again. It's just against white people now. And then, you look back at, like, let's say disability. Okay, so some DEI programs have some great disability aspects. However, all of them existed pre-DEI, and we
Yeah.
already had the Disability Act pre-DEI. So, like, there's actual law already on the books that protect the things they pretend DEI is there to sort of be the protector of, right? When in reality, in many cases, like I said, with racial hiring, DEI has actually been the impetus for going and putting together policies that are racist themselves. So there's no useful purpose for a company at this point, except for if you need to virtue signal to a group of customers. And if that's the case, you probably better check your bottom line and make sure you don't depend on conservative consumers, because if you can't afford to lose us, then you probably shouldn't make a bet against, us as customers by having these policies in the first place, because eventually people will come for it.
One final point. I'm sure a lot of these companies were scared correctly that if they did what you were asking them to do, their backlash in their social media and in their stores from, leftists and activists would be enormous and a nightmare to deal with. Has that been the case for these companies?
So we have 100% strike rate on these companies, and this part is interesting because when a company does not back down right away, and we go ahead with the initial story, and they are like, "We're not making changes," the backlash has been furious, absolutely furious. Like in the case of Harley Davidson,
Yeah.
we did it right before Sturgis, so it had already sort of entered the public psyche a couple days before Sturgis. We started about 10 days before, but it took a while for it to permeate. It might have been even 14 days before Sturgis. But by the time we got there, it was pretty well known. Most of the bikers knew about it. So what happened was we were getting a bunch of photos on the ground from bikers of them removing the Harley emblem. And
Oh,
then
wow.
something incredible happened. Bikers were not going to the Harley tent. It was a ghost town. So I'm posting pictures and video of it being a ghost town. Sturgis is full, right? And
Oh,
90% of the bikers
wow.
there drive Harleys.
Yeah,
Okay.
of course.
So
Yeah.
they're not going to the tent. So they're punishing Harley very effectively. And then Bloomberg reports 2 days before Sturgis ends, Harley packed up their tents and left
No.
because it was so embarrassing. And
Holy
so
crap.
it's a real world effect we're having, to get people to show up and like really take some sort of action in a positive way. Nobody's done anything stupid, thank God, but they've all very sensibly made their voices heard. And I think that's been a big reason for how effective things have been. But there's another part to this. So obviously companies were worried that backtracking on DEI was going to hurt them, number one, in the market, but number two, with other customers. So here's what's happened. The day Tractor Supply went and said, "We're done, no more DEI," their stock went up. And during our campaign against them, they lost a market cap of close to $3 billion. It was 2.8 or 2.75, something
Oof.
like that. During John Deere, they lost close to 10 billion in market cap.
Oh my
Okay.
God. Okay.
When they turned on DEI, their stock went up. In the case of Harley Davidson, their stock went up the day they announced the changes. Okay. So this continues to this day.
Oh,
I
wow.
want to say it's every single company the day they've made the announcement, their stock was up. I might be wrong about one of them. I'm pretty sure, though, if my memory serves me correct, it's every single one. Their stock has gone up the day they made the announcement. So the market hasn't punished them in
Yeah.
that
Okay.
regard. Now, secondary to the market, then you've got the concern about left-wing customers, right? I've heard nothing. I've heard nothing. In fact, even in my case, okay, I've gotten probably 99.9% positive mail, including from Democrats. The few that have not been positive have been almost all crazy people who have like given me, there's a couple active death threats against
Sure,
me where
sure.
like the FBI is investigating one of them. Our local sheriff here in Williamson County is investigating another two of them. But outside of like the crazy people, it's been overwhelmingly positive. And so even people who are like, "I disagree with you on politics, like I've been a Democrat my whole life, but the DEI stuff's nuts. Thank you for what you're doing." Like there's been broad agreement. So I just don't see it. The only thing I've heard of is the HRC saying that they had a bunch of their members email companies. I still have not seen evidence of that. Maybe it's true. Maybe those are real people. But if I were those companies, if those emails do exist, I would tell the companies, I'd go double check those are real. Like that's what
Yeah.
I'd be doing. I'd be seeing if those are even real people, because it's embarrassing online. The HRC's only response to what we've done. And for those who are unfamiliar, that's the Human Rights Campaign, which has nothing to do with human rights. They have a scoring system called the CEI scoring system, Corporate Equality Index. And the CEI scoring system is largely responsible for wokeness in corporate America because it incentivizes companies to do these these things. You want our score, you have to do this, so on and so forth. So I'm giving you like condensed version right now. But the HRC has been very powerful in lobbying corporate America for a long time. And it's kind of funny because like in real life, like they don't have this massive support base. Their support base is basically woke professors, who teach like gender studies, these college Marxist activists and globalists, and the Democrats who are kind of included in the other three groups anyways. Those are pretty much their entire support base. And I'm not talking about Democrat voters even. I'm talking about Democrat politicians.
Yeah.
And so, it's actually a very small group of people who have been supportive of what they've done. But now, all of these companies that we've gotten to flip, almost every single one has said we're no longer going to associate with the HRC and their CEI scoring system. So the HRC's only response has been to pretend that they sent these emails. But on social media, if you look, they have to turn their comments off because they know that they're so incredibly unpopular among people. So like they try to call me names and things like that. And it's just funny because they get ratioed every time by normal people who are on there and are like, you people are insane. Like I have to say, I love the gay people who have stood up and been like, no, you guys don't represent us. You guys are crazy. What you're asking for is crazy. And
Yes.
we agree with Robby. Like the Log Cabin Republicans and their Outspoken Project, they've been very supportive of what we're doing. And so the media wants to frame it as like, homophobic or transphobic or whatever. There's people out there who are, in that group of people saying, no, absolutely not. This is about just common sense.
I've been saying for a while that peak woke is over and the fever was broken. And a lot of conservatives do not want to hear it because, oh, you're saying it went away entirely. I'm not saying it went away entirely. I'm saying we've crossed the hurdle. And I think your work has the fact that there's been no backlash, which again, 3 years ago, I think would have been unthinkable that there'd be none. It would really
I
have been
think
a
so
struggle.
too.
What's
Yeah,
that?
no, I think years ago it would have been a problem.
Oh,
I
yeah.
will say, I think there's something like, I don't know what we would call it, like not used to winning-itis or something, but like there is a group of people who like nothing is ever good enough, where like
Oh, yeah.
you can put together like a really great win like Tractor Supply and they'll complain and be like, well, what about this?
Right.
Or they're probably not telling you the truth. This
You
is
don't,
just a scam and you're going to just let this go and you're going to forget about it if they go the other direction.
and I
And it's
always
like,
tell people get
can you
rid of
be
them.
happy for 2 seconds? Like
No,
be happy for 2 seconds
I
and
tell
take
them,
the win.
I
That's
divest
it.
yourself of these people from your life because
Yeah.
people who are cynical and want to be in a state of misery, the only way they can maintain that is by being contagious. Because if there's one counterexample that their thesis has been disproven, that's why my last book's called The White Pill. So people like that are so toxic and it'll never be enough. Even George Washington beats the British. It's like, oh yeah, well, now you have Hamilton. It's a shut up. I can't work with you. So, folks, head over to malice.locals.com where Robby took questions from supporting listeners. Folks, the documentary can be seen at thewaronchildren.com. Robby, thank you so much. We're running out of time. What has been your favorite part of this interview?
Man, I'm bad at questions like that. I think probably the dad joke because my kids are always proud of my dad jokes. Like they make fun of me for it, but deep down, every kid loves that their dad tells dad jokes because that was totally a dad joke. And I got called out for it, which makes it even better, because there's nothing better than telling a dad joke and then being called out for it being a dad joke. Actually, second to that would be my slip up with Matt's movie name because that's actually the second time I've done that. And I'm not sure why. But it's a funny day here. We've had I think we've worked too many hours, so we deserve a little forgiveness.
You are welcome.
Hi, we're the Nemeth Bros. I'm Nick, and he's Ryan, and I'm a 20-plus year pro wrestling veteran, amateur comedian, F-list actor, wannabe lawyer, I once ate a 96-ounce steak, and we have a new podcast because we finally got some time on our plate called the Nemeth Bros. The Nemeth Bros.
Hey, Nick, what is this podcast about?
This podcast is going to be about stories from the road for the past 20-plus years of my pro wrestling career, winning world championships, injuries, everything in between that you can think of. Stories about you and I putting together a comedy tour, you and I doing skits, me being an F-list actor, on-set stuff, and of course, Q&A, answered questions in depth from the fans who want to hear them the most.
Hey, what if I want to have special guests on that are like famous comedians or showbiz types?
There's no rules. This is America. Bring them in.
Hey, if we're bragging about accomplishments, I have been an extra on Jimmy Kimmel Live 27 times. Follow, rate, and review the Nemeth Bros podcast at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
The Nemeth Bros.
I love reality TV on Pluto TV.
Same, and I love that it's free.
It gives me the freedom to watch Bravo's Real Housewives Vault channel.
I'm totally free to watch Bad Girls Club.
I'm free for Jersey Shore.
Love and Hip Hop, I'm free all day.
Survivor, I'm free all night.
With hundreds of free reality shows, you are totally free to watch what you love on Pluto TV.
Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.